Hey guys, I'm Nathan Cole, and today we feature Karens that died in stupid ways. From a woman who threatened her neighbor and climbed 12 feet with a chainsaw, to a lady who filed 14 complaints over 18 months and stepped onto a sun-baked driveway in direct sunlight, refusing every offer of water or shade. It was July 14, 2016, when the Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on Scottsdale, turning the asphalt into waves of shimmering heat. The temperature had climbed to 112 degrees by early afternoon, the kind of oppressive heat that made breathing feel like inhaling from an oven. The Costco parking lot was packed beyond capacity, cars circling endlessly as weekend shoppers took advantage of summer sales. Brella Tusk, a 47-year-old woman who worked in property sales, pulled her white luxury SUV into the lot just after 2 in the afternoon. She wore a pink velour tracksuit and oversized sunglasses, having spent her morning in heated discussions with her neighborhood association. She spotted a family loading groceries into their sedan near the entrance. Brella immediately stopped her vehicle perpendicular to the space, blocking the lane with her turn signal flashing. From the opposite direction, a younger woman in a compact car approached the same spot. Brella laid on her horn as the family continued their loading, visibly uncomfortable with the attention. When the sedan finally pulled out, the compact car quickly maneuvered into the space. Brella threw her SUV into park in the middle of the traffic lane, engine still running, and stepped out into the scorching heat. She approached the other vehicle with her phone raised, filming as she confronted the driver, who remained inside with the doors locked. Behind her, abandoned SUV, traffic began backing up as several cars waited in the lane. For 3 minutes, she stood in the direct sunlight as shoppers began recording the confrontation. Then, she returned to her vehicle, declaring her intention to wait as long as necessary. Her SUV sat with the engine running and the driver's door wide open, air conditioning fighting a losing battle against the extreme heat pouring through the opening. The temperature outside had climbed to 114 degrees. Despite the running air conditioning, the open door provided little relief, as hot air and reflected heat from the asphalt continued flooding the interior. The sun beat directly through the windshield and open door, radiating heat into the cabin like a furnace. She sat periodically revving the engine and honking, while the other driver had gone inside to shop. 47 minutes into her vigil, the engine temperature gauge began climbing into the red zone. The relentless idling and triple-digit heat, combined with prolonged air conditioning use, pushed the cooling system beyond its limits. As temperatures climbed, the vehicle automatically shut off the air conditioning compressor to protect the engine. Minutes later, the overheating forced the engine to stall. With the engine silent, radiant heat from the sun and asphalt quickly overwhelmed the cabin. Brella remained seated, her phone now recording a video as she documented her complaint. Her face grew increasingly flushed as sweat soaked through her velour tracksuit. A teenage employee collecting carts noticed her vehicle still parked in the lane 15 minutes later. He saw her through the windshield, gesturing at her phone, her face noticeably red. 5 minutes later, a couple observed her slumped slightly to one side. The woman suggested checking on her, but her husband noted the door was open. As time passed after the engine failure, another shopper noticed her hands had stopped moving and her condition appeared to be worsening. 28 minutes after the engine failed, she collapsed forward against the steering wheel. The sustained horn blast drew a crowd. They found her unresponsive, her skin flushed and overheated. Paramedics arrived within 6 minutes. They found her pulseless and in cardiac arrest. Despite immediate cooling measures and advanced life support, her body showed no response. She was pronounced dead at 3:52 that afternoon. The medical examiner determined the cause as severe heat stroke with multiple organ failure. The other driver provided security footage to authorities. The evidence showed Brella had chosen to remain in the vehicle even after the engine failed. No charges were filed. Investigators recovered Brella's phone from the vehicle. It contained a 22-minute video she had recorded, the footage showing her becoming progressively more flushed and disoriented before the phone dropped. The audio captured her final labored breathing. Her family requested the footage never be released publicly. It was July 17, 2016. The northbound merge lane of Interstate 35 outside Round Rock, Texas, moved steadily under late afternoon heat. Traffic flowed at 65 to 70 miles per hour, with vehicles compressing and separating as drivers adjusted to merging lanes, blind spots, and shifting gaps in heavy summer congestion. Brenda Malloy, 48, drove a leased luxury SUV provided by her employer. She worked as a regional sales director for a medical supply company, managing contracts across Central Texas. Her job required firm negotiation and tight deadlines. Co-workers described her as efficient but quick to escalate complaints, often posting negative reviews to apply pressure. That afternoon, she left a drive-thru irritated that her latte was not hot enough. She demanded it be remade extra hot and watched the employee fill the cup nearly to the rim. The plastic lid pressed down unevenly along one side, but she drove off without checking it again. Northbound traffic tightened as vehicles merged from an entrance ramp. A gray sedan entered ahead of her and moved into the right lane with a turn signal. Brenda braked sharply, then accelerated to close the distance. Witness statements later described her riding the sedan's rear bumper and repeatedly sounding her horn. She kept shaking her head and pointing forward as if correcting the other driver's behavior. When the sedan held its lane and speed, she jerked the wheel and moved into the left lane to draw even with it. Traffic continued at around 68 miles per hour. Brenda paced the sedan, turning her head fully toward the driver and shouting across the lanes. She lowered her window halfway and leaned toward the opening, with the coffee cup in her right hand and her left hand tight on the steering wheel. She kept yelling, extending her arm toward the open air as cars moved past on both sides. She then snapped her arm outward and flung the cup. At highway speed, the airflow redirected the liquid instantly. Instead of reaching the sedan, the coffee blew straight back through her own window. A sheet of near-boiling liquid and the loosened plastic lid struck her face and upper chest. Her eyes clamped shut on reflex. Her right hand recoiled, and the cup hit the interior door panel before dropping into the footwell. The SUV began drifting left as steering pressure changed. A semi-truck hauling a box trailer occupied the adjacent lane. The SUV's front quarter panel made contact with the truck's rear tandem wheels. The impact forced the SUV sideways. Its momentum carried it toward the trailer's right side at an angle. The trailer was equipped with a federally required rear underride guard, but this collision occurred along the trailer's side, where side underride protection was limited. The upper edge of the SUV's cabin struck the underside of the trailer at windshield height. The roof structure collapsed backward under the force. The driver's side door frame compressed inward. Traffic camera footage and the rear dash cam confirmed the sequence unfolded in under 4 seconds. Emergency services were contacted immediately. The semi-truck driver slowed and pulled onto the shoulder. First responders from Williamson County arrived in approximately 9 minutes. They found the SUV wedged beneath the trailer's side. Fire crews stabilized the trailer and used hydraulic tools to access the driver compartment. Brenda showed no signs of life at the scene. The medical examiner documented extensive blunt force trauma to the head, neck, and upper chest. The impact fractured the cervical spine and caused severe brain injury. Death was attributed to injuries sustained in a motor vehicle collision. Superficial burns were present on her face and collarbone, but were not fatal. Police classified the crash as a road rage-related loss of vehicle control. No charges were filed against the truck driver. The dashcam video was later included in the investigative record. It was February 7th, 2016, in a frozen lake recreational area along the northern shoreline of a state forest in central Minnesota. The area was a popular winter destination for ice fishing and lakeside walks during the colder months. Seasonal boundary ropes marked the sections of ice that had been tested and cleared for public use. Sections outside the ropes had not been assessed and were posted with thin ice warning signs at several points along the shoreline. Cindy Sorrell was 48 years old and worked as a real estate agent at a small independent brokerage in southern Wisconsin. She traveled frequently for leisure and prided herself on being more adaptable and capable than the average tourist in any environment she visited. She had no experience with frozen lake terrain and no particular knowledge of ice conditions, but carried herself as though both were unnecessary. She had stopped at the recreational area on impulse during a solo winter drive through the region, drawn by the sight of the frozen lake from the road. and hoping to walk far enough out onto the ice to take closer photos of the fishermen she could see in the distance. She parked, walked to the shoreline, and read the thin ice warning sign at the boundary rope. She turned to a man standing nearby with a dog and pointed out that ice fishermen were clearly visible roughly 400 feet out on the lake, using their presence as evidence that the ice across the entire surface was safe. The man told her that the fishermen were in a tested and marked zone, and that the shoreline section near the rope was flagged for a reason. Cindy stepped over the rope without responding and walked out onto the ice. The ice surface looked uniform from where she had been standing at the rope, and it looked the same up close. It was pale and opaque, without any visible dark patches or surface pooling that she had been told to watch for on dangerous ice. It held firm under her first several steps and made no sound. Nothing about it felt different from the tested section further out where the fishermen had set up. She had stopped about 20 feet past the rope and was standing still on the surface. From that distance, the boundary rope behind her looked small, and the fishermen further out were clearly visible, moving around their equipment without any sign of difficulty. The ice under her boots was flat and white and gave no indication of what was directly beneath it. The section she entered sat over a shallow basin close to the shoreline, where water depth and temperature variation caused the ice to freeze unevenly and unpredictably. She had walked approximately 20 feet past the boundary rope when the ice gave way across a several-foot section around her without warning. She dropped through into water approximately 7 feet deep. The broken ice around the hole shifted inward as she grabbed at the edges, and each attempt to pull herself out broke the surrounding shelf further and widened the opening. The water temperature was well below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The man with the dog and 2 other visitors at the rope line witnessed the fracture and the drop. The man unspooled a retractable leash to its full length and lay flat on the ice to distribute his weight while reaching toward her, but could not get close enough to the hole without the ice giving way beneath him. The cold water quickly robbed her of the strength needed to keep herself at the surface. Her body was recovered later that afternoon, once the surrounding ice was assessed and a safe access point was established. The cause of death was determined to be drowning following cold water immersion. A review confirmed the boundary rope and warning signs were properly in place and that she had crossed into the restricted area voluntarily after being verbally warned by another visitor. Witness accounts from 3 people corroborated the full sequence of events. The case was closed as an accidental death with no negligence found on the part of the recreational area. The section where she went through was marked and left undisturbed for the remainder of the season. It was July 18, 2016, in Mesa, Arizona. Afternoon temperatures had climbed above 105 degrees Fahrenheit, pushing most activity indoors. Along a commercial stretch of East Main Street, a small, independently operated hair salon occupied a single storefront. Sunlight reflected off the front windows across light-colored tile flooring. The air conditioning system ran continuously against the desert heat. 4 styling chairs faced wall-mounted mirrors, and a shampoo station sat behind a half-wall partition near the rear. Kestra Vant, 38, arrived for a scheduled haircut. She worked in an administrative role for a residential property management company, processing applications and handling tenant paperwork. Public online records later reviewed showed a pattern of detailed complaints about businesses she visited, often escalating minor issues into formal disputes. Former co-workers described her as highly particular and unwilling to concede when she believed standards were not met. The appointment began routinely. She presented a printed reference image and emphasized precision. The stylist, a woman in her mid-20s, employed at the salon for less than 2 years, completed the cut while the schedule ran slightly behind. After the haircut, Kestra stood and examined the neckline under brighter front lighting. 2 clients later told investigators she began identifying small differences between the result and the reference photo. The stylist offered to make immediate corrections. Kestra declined further adjustment and instead initiated a sustained argument about competence and professionalism. Witnesses stated her tone escalated. She questioned the stylist's training, criticized the delay, and referenced her history of posting public reviews. The stylist attempted to de-escalate and again offered to correct the cut at no charge. Kestra continued the confrontation, drawing attention from everyone inside. During the dispute, she shifted focus to the salon setup. She moved toward the shampoo area behind the partition, stating she intended to document what she described as unsafe conditions. The stylist advised her the wash station was restricted to staff. Kestra proceeded past the barrier despite the instruction. As she entered the area, the tile was damp from recent use. A commercial salon hairdryer sat beside the sink, powered by an extension cord running across the floor from a rear outlet. The basin still contained standing water from a prior rinse. Witnesses reported that Kestra gestured toward the equipment while continuing the argument. As she stepped forward, her sandal caught the extension cord stretched across the walkway. The cord tightened beneath her foot. She attempted to steady herself by reaching toward the countertop hairdryer, which remained plugged in. She lost balance and fell forward. Her forehead struck the rim of the sink before her upper body pitched into the basin. During the fall, the energized hairdryer slipped from her hand into the water while she remained in contact with it. Those present reported hearing a sharp electrical pop, followed by a steady humming sound. The device created a conduction path through the standing water and her upper torso. Electrical current traveled across her chest and right shoulder. Her muscles contracted involuntarily, preventing release. The head impact likely caused disorientation. The circuit did not immediately trip. The stylist moved to the rear outlet and disconnected the extension cord. By the time power was cut, Kestra was unresponsive against the basin. Staff lowered her to the floor and contacted emergency services. No breathing or pulse was observed. Responders arrived within minutes and documented cardiac arrest consistent with ventricular fibrillation. Defibrillation and advanced life support were initiated and continued during transport. Resuscitation efforts at a nearby hospital did not restore sustained cardiac rhythm. She was pronounced deceased later that afternoon. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be accidental electrocution with contributing blunt force head trauma. Electrical burn patterns supported the conduction pathway described by witnesses. A subsequent safety inspection cited improper extension cord placement in a wet area and lack of ground fault protection. Required corrections were completed before the salon reopened. Investigators concluded the electrocution occurred when the powered device entered standing water while she remained in contact with it inside a restricted workspace. The incident was classified as accidental. It was a weekday evening in the summer of 2016 in a mid-sized city in Georgia. The storage facility sat along a quiet commercial strip surrounded by a chain-link fence and limited exterior lighting. Rows of single-story metal units stretched toward the back of the property. After the office closed, the grounds were mostly empty. Corinne Mabette was 43 years old and worked as a shift supervisor at a retail distribution center on the outskirts of the city. She kept irregular hours and rarely followed a predictable schedule outside of work. She had rented a storage unit at the facility for several years and used it regularly to store household overflow, tools, and seasonal equipment. She was known among co-workers for challenging workplace policies she disagreed with by simply not following them, rather than raising the issue through any formal channel. She had disputed fees in person at the facility on multiple occasions by arriving at the front office unannounced with her original rental agreement in hand. The previous year, she had persuaded another unit holder to co-sign a joint grievance letter she had drafted against the facility over a rate increase she considered unjustified. She had ignored 2 written notices about after-hours access sent to her in the weeks prior to the incident and had arrived outside staffed hours on several occasions specifically to avoid direct interaction with management. The issue involved an unpaid balance she believed was a billing error. The facility had locked her out twice in the previous month. That evening, she arrived after the office had closed using an access code that had not yet been deactivated. A gas-powered generator was stored in her 10 by 10 metal unit, which had no built-in ventilation and roughly 800 cubic feet of enclosed space. Corinne unlocked the unit and raised the door. She located the generator near the back wall and pulled it toward the front of the space, positioning it a few feet inside the threshold. Several extension cords were already coiled along the side wall. She connected one of them and started the generator while it was still inside the unit. The engine noise filled the enclosed metal structure immediately. Once it was running, she lowered the roll-up door to within approximately 4 inches of the ground. The sound of the engine continued at a steady pace from inside the unit. From outside, only a faint vibration and low mechanical hum could be heard through the metal door. No additional adjustments were made to increase airflow. The unit block remained quiet. No other doors in that row were open at the time. Approximately 20 minutes later, another unit holder entered the facility and drove toward his unit in the same row. As he stepped out of his vehicle, he heard the sound of an engine running from one of the closed units. He noticed a thin strip of light visible beneath Corinne's roll-up door. He approached and knocked several times. There was no response. He lifted the roll-up door partway and saw Corinne lying on the floor near the back wall of the unit. The generator was still operating beside her. He immediately lowered the door and stepped away from the structure before contacting emergency services. The generator was confirmed still running when first responders arrived. The roll-up door gap was measured at approximately 4 inches. Carbon monoxide poisoning was confirmed as the cause of death. The manner was ruled accidental. The facility's access log showed she had entered after staffed hours using a code that had not yet been deactivated. A review of internal procedures identified a delay in code deactivation, though this had no bearing on the final ruling. The case was closed without further action against any individual. It was July 11th, 2017, in a residential neighborhood in Scottsdale, Arizona. An excessive heat warning had been issued that morning. By early afternoon, temperatures were expected to reach about 114 degrees Fahrenheit. Streets were quiet, as most residents stayed indoors. In direct sun, the dark asphalt driveways and roads had already begun heating far above the air temperature. Gloria Finch was 58 years old and had lived in the same house for 19 years. She bought it with her husband in 1998. After their divorce in 2011, she remained there alone. Gloria worked part-time as a bookkeeper for a local heating and air company. In early 2016, the house next door was converted into a short-term rental property. Gloria strongly opposed the change. Over the next year and a half, she filed complaints with the city zoning office, her homeowners association, the rental listing service, and the state consumer complaint office. Records later showed 14 formal complaints, all closed without finding a violation. Neighbors said Gloria sometimes confronted guests when they arrived. On 2 occasions, visitors called police to report arguments in the driveway. Officers documented the encounters, but no enforcement action followed. Gloria kept copies of her complaints in a folder. On July 11th, local news stations repeated the heat advisory throughout the day. By mid-afternoon, the temperature had reached about 114 degrees Fahrenheit, according to nearby weather stations. At 1:48 p.m., a rideshare vehicle stopped in front of the rental house. 5 women visiting from Denver stepped out with luggage for a weekend trip. Gloria came out of her front door before they reached the walkway. Holding her folder, she walked directly into the driveway and stood between the group and the front path. She told them the property was operating illegally and said they should not enter. The rideshare driver confirmed the address on his phone and left after completing the drop-off. The visitors began pulling suitcases from the sidewalk. Gloria stepped forward again, blocking the path to the entry. One of the guests, who later told police she was a nurse, suggested moving the conversation to the shaded porch and offered her a bottle of water, but Gloria declined. The discussion continued in the open driveway under direct sunlight. The guests spoke calmly and asked questions about the complaints she mentioned, while Gloria continued explaining why she believed the property violated local rules. Around 2:20 p.m., another guest again offered water and suggested stepping into the shade near the covered entryway. Gloria declined a second time and remained standing on the asphalt driveway. By 2:30 p.m., she had been in direct sunlight for more than 40 minutes. Witnesses said her speech became repetitive as she continued arguing about zoning complaints. At 2:39 p.m., Gloria stopped mid-sentence and appeared unsteady. Her knees bent and she dropped into a seated position on the driveway without bracing herself. One of the visitors, a nurse, moved to her immediately. Gloria's skin felt extremely hot and her breathing was shallow. Her eyes were open but unfocused, and she did not respond clearly when spoken to. The nurse called emergency services. Responders arrived at 2:47 p.m. and found Gloria confused and disoriented. Paramedics measured her core temperature at about 107.4 degrees Fahrenheit and began emergency cooling. She was transported to a nearby regional hospital. Despite aggressive treatment, her condition worsened over the next several hours. Medical records later showed signs of organ damage consistent with severe heat stroke, including kidney failure, liver injury, and abnormal blood clotting. Gloria died later that evening. The medical examiner concluded that her death was caused by hyperthermia due to environmental heat exposure. The examination documented extensive heat-related damage across multiple organs. Police documented the incident and filed no charges. Witness statements confirmed that Gloria had remained in direct sunlight during the confrontation and had declined several offers of water and shade before she collapsed. It was May 3rd, 2014. In a quiet suburban neighborhood outside Marietta, Georgia, a fenced power substation stood behind new steel posts and clearly marked high-voltage warning signs. The recent security upgrade had drawn complaints for weeks. By late afternoon, damp grass still held rainwater from the night before, and several neighbors gathered along the perimeter sidewalk. At the center of the dispute was Cheryl Denton, 52. She had served 3 years on the Homeowners Association board and built her reputation on strict property standards and protecting resale values. Before retirement, she worked as an insurance claims adjuster, reviewing damage reports and disputing payouts. She relied heavily on documentation and formal complaints. Neighbors described her as persistent and confrontational during disputes, often escalating minor issues into formal challenges with local agencies. The fence she opposed was a commercial pulsed electric security fence rated for perimeter protection, similar to systems used at utility sites. It was not a steady current. Instead, it released brief, high-voltage pulses at set intervals, each lasting only fractions of a second, designed to discourage climbing or tampering. Under normal dry conditions, contact would cause intense pain and involuntary muscle contraction, but typically not sustained injury. The system depended on grounding. Electricity required a path through a body to the earth to complete a circuit. The fence displayed multiple danger high-voltage placards spaced every few feet along the wire. That afternoon, Cheryl attended a small gathering near the sidewalk bordering the facility. She had previously emailed and mailed formal complaints to the utility company demanding the removal of what she called an excessive measure. Heavy rain the previous night left the soil saturated, and shallow puddles remained along the fence line. The grass near the posts was visibly wet and flattened in places from foot traffic. She arrived carrying a standard metal bucket filled with tap water. Her stated purpose was to show that the fence would not cause harm. Several neighbors stood nearby, and a general phone recording occurred, though no clear video captured the exact electrical contact itself. The fence was active. Later inspection confirmed the energizer was functioning normally and had not been shut down. Cheryl removed her sandals and stepped directly onto the wet grass within a few feet of the lowest energized strand. She held the metal handle of the bucket with both hands. The ground beneath her bare feet was dark with moisture. She lifted the bucket and threw water toward the wire at about chest height. The water arced toward the wire as it left the bucket. Investigators later believed the wet stream and saturated ground likely created a conductive path during the next pulse, allowing current to pass through the metal handle, across her body, and into the soil. Her body stiffened immediately. Her shoulders drew upward and her back arched as muscles contracted involuntarily. The bucket dropped from her hands. She fell backward onto the wet grass and did not attempt to rise. The pulse ended almost instantly, but she remained motionless. Emergency services were called immediately. Paramedics arrived within minutes and began resuscitation efforts, including chest compressions and cardiac monitoring. Despite intervention, no sustained heart rhythm returned. Utility monitoring equipment recorded a brief ground fault at approximately the same time. Investigators later confirmed the fence system operated within manufacturer specifications and showed no malfunction. There was no evidence of prolonged entanglement or extended exposure to current. The county medical examiner determined the cause of death was cardiac arrhythmia triggered by electrical shock. In simple terms, The pulse disrupted the heart's electrical rhythm, causing it to stop beating effectively. Examination found small surface burns on her hands and the soles of her feet consistent with an electrical pathway, but no deep internal burning. The HOA board halted its formal objections to the fence. The utility company later held a public safety meeting explaining grounding, wet surface conductivity, and how pulsed perimeter systems function. Neighbor recordings were provided to investigators and reviewed as part of the final report. It was October 22, 2018, in a petrified forest preserve in northeastern Arizona. The site was a federally protected stretch of desert badlands containing thousands of fossilized logs scattered across an eroded landscape of low ridges and shallow gullies. Marked walking trails ran between the main fossil clusters, and posted signs at the trailhead and along the path warned visitors that removing petrified wood was a federal offense and that leaving the trail was prohibited due to unstable terrain. Estelle Diggins was 63 years old and had recently retired after spending the better part of 3 decades as an office administrator at a mid-sized company in central Oklahoma. She had taken up solo road tripping in her first year of retirement and considered herself a seasoned traveler who no longer needed guidance from anyone. She carried herself with a quiet but persistent condescension toward younger visitors and park staff alike, and had a habit of framing rule-breaking as a sign of experience rather than ignorance. She arrived at the preserve in the early afternoon, declined a trail map at the entrance station, and started down the main path at her own pace. Within the first quarter mile, she stepped off the trail to examine a fossilized log cluster more closely. A ranger on foot patrol spotted her and redirected her back to the path. She returned without argument and waited until the ranger was out of sight before stepping off again at a second cluster further down the trail. She moved between 2 large horizontal fossilized logs lying close together, stepping onto the ground between them to get a better look at the surface detail of the nearer log. The logs were each several feet in diameter and had been lying in the same position for an estimated 200 million years, their original wood tissue replaced entirely by silica over time. The surfaces were rough and multicolored, streaked with deep reds and grays from the mineral content of the surrounding soil. The ground between them was pale and dry, packed hard enough that it did not shift under her first step, with no visible cracks, depressions, or discoloration to suggest anything beneath it was hollow. The area had come off a wet spring, followed by an unusually dry summer, a cycle that accelerates the formation of subsurface erosion cavities beneath the hardened desert crust. The ground between the 2 logs appeared identical to the surrounding terrain, firm, dry, and stable. It was not. A shallow erosion cavity had formed directly beneath the surface layer, hollowed out by seasonal water movement through the porous sediment below. The crust held for a half second under Estelle's weight before collapsing. She dropped approximately 8 feet into a narrow cavity, roughly 3 feet wide, landing feet first before pitching sideways against the cavity wall. The impact was immediate and severe. She came to rest wedged at an angle with no room to maneuver. A family of 4 on the marked trail had been watching her from about 25 feet away and saw the ground give way beneath her as she dropped into a narrow cavity. The adults called out but could not reach her without leaving the path themselves. A ranger was flagged down within minutes. Estelle was found wedged in the cavity, minimally responsive and unable to move, with a visible deformity to her left leg, consistent with the drop and impact. She became unresponsive shortly after being located and did not recover. The cause of death was determined to be spinal trauma and internal injuries sustained in the fall. A review confirmed she had left the marked trail twice and had been redirected by a ranger on the first occasion before returning to the restricted terrain voluntarily. The family's account corroborated the full sequence of events. The case was closed as an accidental death with no negligence found on the part of the preserve. The cavity was marked and fenced off before the site closed for the evening. It was March 3, 2017, in Dayton, Ohio. A layer of gray cloud cover hung low over a commercial strip where a small independent coffee shop occupied the corner of a brick storefront. The sidewalks were damp from overnight rain, reflecting muted traffic lights at the intersection. Inside, fluorescent lights reflected off freshly mopped white tile floors. A waist-high swinging gate separated the customer area from the narrow workspace behind the counter. The hum of refrigeration units blended with the hiss of pressurized steam from the espresso machine. Liddy Spoff, 41, worked part-time at a dental office, managing front desk duties. Outside of work, she maintained an active social media presence, documenting what she described as poor customer service. Over several years, she posted detailed complaints about minor inconveniences, often including photos and demands for refunds. Those familiar with her described a pattern. When told something could not be done, she often tried to prove it could. That morning, she ordered a latte and instructed the barista to make it exactly boiling. The 19-year-old employee explained that milk is typically steamed to about 150 degrees Fahrenheit to preserve texture and prevent scalding. Commercial espresso machines generate steam above 200 degrees Fahrenheit, but it is controlled before contacting milk. Heating milk to boiling, 212 degrees Fahrenheit at standard pressure, would ruin its structure and create safety risks. Liddy insisted the machine was capable of higher heat and accused the barista of not knowing how to operate it properly. As the explanation continued, Liddy stepped closer to the counter. Without permission, she unlatched the waist-high gate and entered the employee-only area. The barista, startled, backed toward the register and told her to step away from the equipment. Two customers waiting in line moved toward the exit. The espresso machine had just completed a shot extraction. The portafilter remained locked into the group head, where water had been forced through compacted coffee grounds at roughly 9 bars of pressure. The boiler maintained steam pressure slightly above 1 bar for milk frothing. Liddy grabbed the portafilter handle and tried to twist it free. Because pressure inside the group head had not fully dissipated, the seal resisted briefly before releasing abruptly. When the portafilter disengaged, a burst of superheated water and steam expelled outward from the group head. The liquid temperature exceeded 200 degrees Fahrenheit. The spray struck the left side of her face and neck at close range. At the same time, her reflex caused her elbow to hit the steam wand control, opening it further. A second plume of steam vented across her upper chest. She recoiled, losing footing on the damp tile. Her heel slid against the smooth surface. She fell backward, striking her shoulder against a wall-mounted shelving bracket. The metal support bent, dislodging ceramic mugs that shattered across the floor. The barista shut off the steam valve and hit the emergency cutoff switch within seconds. Another employee called 911. The entire sequence, from entry behind the counter to shutdown, lasted less than 30 seconds. Emergency responders arrived within 8 minutes. Liddy was conscious, but in severe distress. Paramedics documented deep partial thickness and full thickness burns to her face, neck, and upper chest. Burn specialists estimated the injuries covered about 18% of her total body surface area, with critical airway involvement from steam inhalation. Swelling progressed rapidly, despite intubation and aggressive fluid resuscitation at the regional burn center 12 miles away. She developed respiratory failure and burn-related shock later that evening and was pronounced deceased. A subsequent investigation reviewed surveillance footage and inspected the equipment. The espresso machine's pressure gauges and safety valves were operating within manufacturer's specifications. Commercial machines include pressure relief systems, but they cannot prevent injury if a pressurized portafilter is removed too early. Investigators concluded the incident resulted from unauthorized interference with functioning equipment. The shop was not cited for violations, but installed a self-closing, lockable gate and added warning signage. The barista received counseling and later transferred locations. It was a weekday morning in the spring of 2016 in a residential neighborhood in Sacramento, California. The narrow 2-lane street had a noticeable downhill grade, with posted signs reminding drivers to turn their wheels into the curb when parking. Deborah Koslow was 54 years old and worked part-time as a bookkeeper for a small family-owned business. She kept a consistent daily routine, running errands in the same general area most weekday mornings before going in for her afternoon shift. She had driven the same routes through that neighborhood for years and was familiar with nearly every block. People who knew her described her as someone who treated every minor dispute as a matter of principle rather than convenience, and who did not respond well to being corrected by anyone she considered to be in a position of minor authority. She had contested parking citations on at least 4 separate occasions in the 2 years prior. On one occasion, she had followed a meter maid to their next stop on the same street to continue an argument that had already been resolved against her. She was known among neighbors for sending group emails about parking violations on their block and had once demanded written justification from a parking enforcement officer for a citation she had received years earlier. On the morning of the incident, Deborah parked her 1998 Honda Accord on the downhill side of the street, which had an approximately 8% grade, to drop off a document at a neighbor's house. She left the car in park but did not turn the front wheels into the curb, violating posted parking rules, a habit she had maintained for years. A meter maid was already writing a citation when she returned minutes later. Deborah approached immediately and began contesting the citation on the spot. The meter maid pointed to the posted sign and indicated the wheels were not turned into the curb. Deborah disagreed and stated she had parked on that street many times without issue. The exchange continued for several minutes without resolution. Neither party moved from the spot. As the conversation continued, Deborah reached back into the open driver's side door and leaned across toward the passenger seat where the folder was sitting. While leaning across the seat, her weight shifted onto the door frame and seat edge. Investigators determined the transmission had not been fully engaged in park when she exited the vehicle, leaving the parking mechanism only partially seated. The shift in her weight altered the load on the drivetrain, allowing the partially engaged parking mechanism to slip free. The car began rolling backward down the grade. Deborah was still partially inside the doorframe when the vehicle started moving. Her body weight was distributed between the doorframe and the seat, which made it difficult to push herself clear quickly. The meter maid's vehicle was parked about 15 feet behind Deborah's car. On the 8% grade, the rollback covered that distance in roughly 3 to 4 seconds. Deborah was still partially inside the doorframe and could not pull clear before her rear bumper struck the front of the meter maid's vehicle, pinning her at the hip and lower torso and causing fatal internal injuries. The meter maid was standing approximately 6 feet to the side at the moment the car began moving and witnessed the entire sequence from start to finish. 2 residents on the sidewalk across the street also observed the rollback and collision. All 3 accounts were consistent on every key detail. Deborah was pronounced dead at the scene. The transmission was found disengaged from park, and the folder she had been reaching for was open on the passenger seat. The front wheels were still pointing straight, consistent with witness accounts. The death was ruled accidental, and the case was closed without further action. It was February 22, 2018, outside a busy bar in a suburb east of Sacramento, California. By late evening, the sidewalk patio was crowded with customers finishing drinks and talking under string lights near the entrance. Music from inside carried through the open doors while people moved between the bar and the outdoor tables. One of the customers outside that night was Marlene Group, 53. She worked from home doing data entry for an insurance company and spent most days inside, usually leaving the house only for errands. On some evenings, she visited neighborhood bars for a drink and conversation. Staff at this bar already recognized her. Over the previous year, employees had asked her several times to calm down or leave after arguments with other customers. Witnesses later described a pattern. Marlene often stood near groups she did not know, watching their conversations and commenting on their behavior even when she had not been invited into the discussion. Several patrons told investigators she had a habit of criticizing strangers for how they talked, drank, or used the crowded patio space, and she often refused to step away when asked. That evening, Marlene arrived shortly after 9:30 p.m. and ordered a drink at the bar. After finishing it, she stepped outside to the sidewalk patio where several groups of customers were standing around tall metal tables near the entrance steps. Among the customers on the patio was Divine Cerna, 28, who had stepped outside with friends to finish their drinks. Divine had some martial arts training and was standing with the group beside a tall patio table near the short concrete staircase that led down to the parking lot. Marlene moved close to their table and began commenting loudly about how crowded the patio area had become. Divine and her friends initially ignored the remarks, but Marlene remained nearby and continued directing comments toward them. Witnesses later said Marlene appeared irritated and was speaking louder as the conversation continued. Divine eventually asked her politely to give them some space so they could finish their drinks. Marlene did not move. Instead, she stepped closer to the table and continued arguing about people taking over the sidewalk. A bartender near the doorway noticed the tension but did not intervene immediately. Divine turned back toward the table and began gathering empty glasses to take inside. As she reached across the tabletop, her elbow brushed lightly against Marlene's forearm. Several witnesses later described the contact as accidental. Marlene reacted immediately. She pulled her arm back, raised her voice, and shoved Divine in the shoulder with both hands. Divine stepped backward to regain her balance. Witnesses said she raised her hands and told Marlene to stop touching her. Marlene continued shouting and moved forward again, pushing at Divine's shoulders while closing the distance between them. Divine stepped back a second time as Marlene kept advancing and yelling. At that point, Divine reacted defensively. She lifted her leg and delivered a quick kick to Marlene's upper chest to create distance as Marlene continued moving toward her. The kick pushed Marlene backward. She stumbled toward the entrance steps behind her and lost balance. Her heel slipped along the edge of the top concrete step, and her body dropped backward. The side of her head struck the corner of the stair with a sharp impact before the rest of her body collapsed onto the landing below. Several people nearby heard the sound of the impact. Witnesses said Marlene stopped moving immediately after the fall. Divine and several nearby customers rushed to her as someone called emergency services. Paramedics arrived within minutes and transported her to a nearby trauma hospital, but she died later that night despite emergency surgery. The medical examiner later determined that the fall had fractured the left temporal bone of her skull and torn an artery beneath it. Blood began collecting between the skull and the surface of the brain, forming an epidural hematoma that rapidly increased pressure inside the skull and disrupted the brain centers responsible for breathing and consciousness. The official cause of death was blunt force head trauma. Police later reviewed security footage from cameras outside the bar and interviewed multiple witnesses. Investigators determined that the confrontation escalated after Marlene shoved Divine during the argument. The kick occurred immediately afterward and caused Marlene to fall backward onto the concrete steps. Based on witness statements and video evidence, authorities concluded that Divine's action occurred as a defensive response to the shove. No criminal charges were filed. It was November 15, 2015, at the King of Prussia Mall in Pennsylvania. A main escalator between the first and second floors had been shut down since morning due to a mechanical failure in the step drive system, with interlocking safety barricades and warning signs positioned across both entrances to block access for shoppers. Maintenance crews were operating the escalator in inspection mode when a diagnostic condition left the step drive stopped while the handrail moved briefly during testing. A rare mismatch investigators later described as a temporary safety hazard. A security guard directed shoppers toward the elevator and side staircase as maintenance personnel worked nearby. Lindley Priff, a 39-year-old lifestyle blogger, entered the mall wearing 4-inch stiletto heels and carrying 6 shopping bags from various stores. Security later noted she appeared unsteady on her feet, and toxicology would later confirm alcohol in her system. She continued filming content for her social media accounts as she moved through the mall, documenting luxury shopping experiences. Her afternoon had been dedicated to filming herself in different locations throughout the mall for her online followers. The broken escalator presented an obstacle to her planned route. The metal steps sat motionless while the rubber handrail continued its upward movement, creating a dangerous mismatch that maintenance crews were attempting to repair. The security guard was directing foot traffic away from the hazardous equipment when Lindley approached, demanding to know why she couldn't use the escalator. When informed that the escalator was experiencing a partial mechanical failure and was potentially dangerous, Lindley became agitated. She complained that her high heels made the regular stairs difficult and that waiting for elevators was inconvenient. The guard explained the safety concerns and pointed toward alternative routes, but Lindley dismissed these warnings as unnecessary restrictions. The guard momentarily turned her attention to assist an elderly customer who needed directions. During this brief window, Lindley ducked under the caution tape and stepped onto the motionless escalator. Her stiletto heels immediately made contact with the metal step edges, which provided no stability for narrow heel points. She lost her balance within seconds. Instinctively, she reached for the rubber handrail, which was still moving upward despite the steps being stationary. This created a pulling force that dragged her forward while her feet remained planted, causing her body to twist unnaturally. Her right stiletto heel caught against the edge of a step cleat as the moving handrail continued pulling her upper body forward. The heel snapped off completely while her ankle twisted violently. She fell face first down the motionless steps, her shopping bag scattering as she tumbled. The metal edges of each step struck her head and body as she fell approximately 20 feet down the escalator. Her momentum carried her to the bottom, where her head struck the metal comb plate, resulting in severe cranial trauma later confirmed by the medical examiner. Shoppers in the area immediately began screaming and calling for help. The security guard ran over and found Lindley unconscious with severe head trauma, blood flowing from her ears and nose. She called emergency services while attempting to provide basic first aid. Paramedics arrived within 7 minutes and found Lindley unresponsive with no spontaneous respiration and fixed, dilated pupils. She was transported to the hospital but was pronounced dead at 3:45 p.m. from multiple skull fractures and traumatic brain injury. The medical examiner determined that the combination of falling down the metal steps and the final impact with the comb plate had caused unsurvivable damage. Mall security footage clearly showed Lindley had deliberately bypassed all safety barriers and warnings. The escalator had been properly marked as out of service due to the dangerous partial mechanical failure. The mall's insurance company determined she was entirely at fault for ignoring safety measures. Investigators recovered Lindley's phone from the scene, which had been recording when she bypassed the safety barriers. The recording documented her bypassing the posted safety barriers moments before stepping onto the disabled escalator. At her family's request, this footage was never released to the public. It was August 14, 2017. The late afternoon heat hung over a regional amusement park outside Springfield, Missouri. The Sky Flyer Tower rotated steadily above the midway, chairs tracing wide circles against a pale sky. From the ground, it looked controlled and ordinary. By sunset, one empty swing would still be turning slowly. Earlier that day, Deanna Price, 53, arrived at the park with 2 colleagues from the apartment complexes she managed. She had spent nearly 20 years in property management, handling lease disputes, maintenance complaints, and tenant conflicts. The role required firm rule enforcement, and she often approached disagreements as matters of authority. Friends described her as highly conscious of appearance and status. She documented issues carefully and rarely backed down, especially when others were watching. That afternoon, she joined the line for the Sky Flyer swing ride, a rotating tower attraction that lifted riders high above the park before spinning them in wide circles. As the line crawled forward, she began complaining loudly about delays and staff efficiency. When assigned to share a double-width swing chair with a teenage boy in a stained work shirt, she refused outright. She insisted on riding alone and argued with the operator about seating assignments, drawing attention from nearby guests. After verifying her weight met the single-rider allowance for the 2-person chair, staff permitted her request. The lap bar was lowered and the seatbelt fastened. But witnesses later said she continued speaking sharply to the operator and gesturing downward as the ride began its ascent. It was about 88 degrees with a light breeze under 10 miles per hour, and the ride had cleared its routine inspection earlier that morning with no reported mechanical issues. As the swings lifted, Deanna adjusted a large handbag on her lap. Surveillance video shows her leaning forward before the ride reached full rotation. As speed increased, centrifugal force pushed the chairs outward. Readers were pressed back into their seats by the outward pull. Witnesses below observed her repeatedly reaching toward her waist area. At peak rotation, chairs extended at roughly a 35 to 40 degree angle from vertical. The outward force pressed riders firmly against the lap bar. Video later reviewed by park officials showed Deanna unclipping her secondary seatbelt while the ride was in motion. She appeared to reposition her bag and retrieve her phone. With the belt disengaged, only the lap bar remained as restraint. Seconds later, her body shifted forward. She leaned down and slightly to her left. The outward force kept the lap bar tight against her upper thighs, but her hips slid forward as her torso moved beyond the bar's centerline. The lap bar was not designed to restrain a rider who leaned forward beneath it. A nearby rider later stated he saw her legs extend downward unexpectedly. She slipped completely from the seat at an estimated height between 80 and 90 feet. The fall was captured on park CCTV from two angles. She struck a landscaped mulch area near a perimeter fence. The impact was head first, followed by her upper body collapsing onto the ground. The ride operator initiated an emergency stop, and emergency services were contacted immediately. Paramedics arrived within minutes. Deanna was unresponsive with severe head trauma and compromised breathing. Advanced life support was initiated on site before transport. She was pronounced dead shortly after arrival at a nearby hospital. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as multiple blunt force injuries from a high-elevation fall. The autopsy found severe skull fractures, traumatic brain injury, broken ribs, and internal bleeding, consistent with a head-first impact from significant height. Toxicology tests were negative for alcohol and drugs. Park investigators reviewed maintenance logs and surveillance footage. All mechanical systems functioned properly, and the lap bar showed no defect. Video confirmed the seatbelt was unlatched during operation. In the following weeks, the park implemented enhanced restraint checks and installed larger warning signs, stating that removing restraints mid-ride can result in death. It was September 3, 2015, in a small private show cave built into a limestone cavern system outside Carlsbad, New Mexico. Guided groups moved through the main chambers, while all side passages remained roped off and strictly restricted due to lower ceilings, unstable rock, and wet, uneven flooring. Florine Decker was 57 years old and worked as a floor supervisor at a grocery store in western Texas. She had planned a solo weekend trip with a short list of nearby tourist sites she wanted to visit. She was the kind of person who needed to be the most informed person in any group she joined and had a visible resistance to being told what to do by anyone she considered beneath her. She had taken cave tours before and treated that prior experience as sufficient reason to disregard instructions she felt were redundant. She joined a group of 11 for a standard 90-minute tour, positioned herself near the front, and began talking over the guide during the entrance briefing. The guide addressed her directly after she touched a formation in the first chamber. She touched a second one shortly after, and the guide reminded the entire group again. By the second chamber, Florine had drifted toward a roped side passage about 8 feet from where the others were standing. The guide was answering a question from a tourist at the far end of the chamber when Florine stepped over the rope and moved into the passage alone. The temperature dropped noticeably within the first few feet of the passage. The ceiling came down quickly from the main chamber height to just over her head, and the walls narrowed on both sides until her shoulders were close to brushing the stone. The sound of the tour group faded almost immediately, replaced by the faint drip of mineral water somewhere further in, and the sound of her own footsteps on the wet floor. She kept moving further in. The walls were close enough on both sides that her arms brushed the stone when she did not keep them in front of her. The ceiling continued dropping, and she had to tilt her head forward within a few steps. Her shoulders were no longer clearing the walls cleanly, and she had begun angling her body sideways before she reached the narrowest point. The passage ran roughly 15 feet before tightening to a gap of about 16 inches wide at chest height, with a ceiling dropping to just over 4 feet. The floor was slick with mineral moisture and sloped slightly downward. Florine moved into the narrow section and turned sideways to push through. As she forced her way through, her movement disturbed a partially loosened ceiling slab, approximately 3 feet across, that dropped and landed across the passage directly behind her, sealing the only way back. The passage ahead narrowed further to an impassable point within a few feet. She was enclosed in a section too tight to turn around in, too low to stand upright in, and completely blocked at the only exit. 3 tourists standing near the rope line had watched her enter and heard the slab drop. They called out to the guide immediately. The guide reached the rope line within seconds. Florine was audible but could not move or breathe effectively in the confined space. The passage walls pressed against her chest and restricted her ability to expand her lungs fully. She gradually lost consciousness as the pressure on her chest prevented full breaths before the slab could be cleared, and did not recover. The cause of death was determined to be positional asphyxia resulting from chest compression in a confined space. A review confirmed Florine had stepped over the rope barrier voluntarily after being addressed twice by the guide. Witness accounts from 3 tourists corroborated the full sequence of events. The case was closed as an accidental death with no negligence found on the part of the facility. The side passage was permanently sealed following the incident. It was September 12, 2015, in Tallahassee, Florida. A 110-foot cell tower stood inside a fenced gravel lot on the eastern edge of the city, surrounded by chain-link barriers and posted high-voltage warning signs. The isolated service site sat away from nearby homes, with electrical equipment humming at the base. A contracted tower technician, 52, had arrived earlier that morning to service ground-level components inside a metal cabinet near the base. The gate was typically kept locked, but he had left it temporarily unsecured while retrieving equipment from his truck parked just outside the perimeter. High-voltage warnings in faded yellow and black lettering were posted along the fence and cabinet doors. Mavia Klatt, 35, worked in a medical billing office and had spent months posting complaints online about poor cell reception in her neighborhood. She frequently tagged her service provider in public posts, accusing the company of negligence and overcharging customers. In messages and comment threads, she insisted the nearby tower was not functioning properly and stated she would personally intervene if the issue was not resolved. That afternoon, after another dropped call, she drove to the tower site. When she saw the gate partially open, she entered the lot and began calling out toward the structure, demanding an explanation for what she believed was ongoing service failure. The contracted technician was inside a ground-level cabinet and had temporarily unlocked the tower's climb shield to access the ladder, leaving it unsecured while retrieving equipment from his truck. Mavia walked directly to the exposed ladder system and began climbing without a harness, helmet, or fall protection. When the technician stepped outside moments later and saw her several feet above ground, he ordered her to come down and warned her that the equipment was energized. She continued ascending despite the warning, insisting she had a right to inspect what she believed was faulty infrastructure. She climbed to approximately 35 feet before slowing near a mounted junction assembly supplying power to transmission components above. As she steadied herself on the ladder, she reached toward a thick cable entering the housing, attempting to locate what she believed was the source of the service problem. Witness accounts described a sudden flash, consistent with an electrical arc, followed by a sharp cracking sound. Investigators later determined she likely contacted an energized component or created a conductive path between live equipment and the grounded tower. The resulting shock would have been instantaneous. Her body stiffened briefly before she lost muscular control. She fell backward from roughly 30 feet. During the descent, she struck a horizontal crossbrace about 10 feet below, altering her trajectory before dropping the remaining distance onto the gravel surface. The technician called emergency services immediately and approached without moving her, recognizing the risk of spinal injury. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes. She was unresponsive, pulseless, and had sustained catastrophic trauma consistent with both high-voltage electrical injury and a fall from height. Despite resuscitation efforts, she was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be combined electrocution and blunt force trauma. The tower operator confirmed the structure and electrical systems were functioning within regulatory standards at the time. No service malfunction was detected. Following the investigation, the contractor reinforced perimeter fencing, added redundant locking mechanisms to the gate, and reviewed site security protocols to prevent unauthorized entry during service intervals. Authorities ruled the death an accidental trespass-related electrocution resulting from unauthorized access to restricted infrastructure. Investigators found no evidence of equipment malfunction or operator negligence. Concluding the tower had been operating within regulatory standards, the case was closed without charges. It was the evening of January 14, 2015, in a remote area of northern Wisconsin. January temperatures in the region often fall into the single digits. The cabin sat miles from the nearest town, connected by unlit two-lane highways and narrow private roads cutting through dense forest. Marlene was 61 years old and had been retired for 3 years after a long career as a school librarian. She spent her winters splitting time between her apartment and a shared family cabin in the northern part of the state. She rarely drove in winter conditions and relied on other family members for most of the logistics during cabin trips. Within the family, she had a reputation for dominating group decisions and responding poorly when challenged. On previous visits, she had reorganized sleeping arrangements, kitchen storage, and common areas without asking, then treated objections as ingratitude. She had stopped speaking to a sibling for several months over a disagreement about shared furniture. People close to her described a pattern where she reframed losing an argument as choosing to disengage. She did not back down, and she did not turn back. On the second evening of the trip, a disagreement developed over sleeping arrangements that had been informally agreed upon before anyone arrived. The dispute involved Marlene and at least 2 of the 3 relatives present. It escalated over the course of about an hour. At one point, a relative told her directly that it was too cold to be outside without proper clothing and that she should calm down before doing something she couldn't take back. Marlene told him she didn't need to be managed. A few minutes later, another relative handed her coat to her and suggested she at least put it on. She pushed it back. She said she wasn't going anywhere, then walked out the door without it. The temperature that evening was 9 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind brought the effective temperature down to approximately -6 degrees Fahrenheit. The relatives assumed she had gone to sit in one of the 2 cars parked outside, which would have been the reasonable thing to do. No one went out immediately to check. When one relative did go out several minutes later, both cars were empty, and the exterior light showed her footprints in the packed snow leading away from the vehicles and down the cabin road toward the highway. The relatives went back inside for their coats and keys before driving out to look, which added more time before any active search began. By then, she had already reached the highway. Marlene had walked the full length of the cabin road and turned onto the highway shoulder. Investigators later reconstructed her path from physical evidence. Her footprints tracked along the shoulder for approximately a third of a mile before veering from the packed surface into the looser drifted snow at the road's edge. The snow on the embankment showed a clear disturbance where she had descended the slope, disrupted crust, compressed drift, and a drag pattern consistent with someone lowering themselves to sit. She came to rest at the base of a guardrail post on the embankment below road level and out of sight from passing vehicles. She had no coat, no gloves, no hat, and was wearing the indoor shoes she had on during the argument. At 9 degrees Fahrenheit with wind chill, exposed skin begins losing heat rapidly within minutes. She was found the following morning by a driver who had pulled over on the shoulder to check a loose item in the bed of his truck. He noticed her slumped against the guardrail post on the embankment below road level. She was unresponsive. She was approximately 0.4 miles from the cabin turnoff. The relatives confirmed the timeline, the warnings given, and the time she left. Their accounts matched the physical evidence, including her footprint trail and the disturbed snow on the embankment. The coat she refused was later found draped over a chair inside the cabin. Marlene was pronounced dead at the scene. The cause of death was determined to be environmental exposure. The manner was ruled accidental. No other parties were found to have contributed to the circumstances of her death. The case was closed without further action against any individual. It was September 19, 2016, on a 4-lane commercial road in a suburb west of Chicago. Morning traffic was building as commuters moved through the corridor toward nearby office parks and shopping centers. Cars filled the curbside parking lane outside a strip of small businesses, leaving only tight spaces between vehicles. Patrice Holden was 48 years old and had lived in the area for more than a decade. She worked part-time in an office nearby and often stopped along the commercial strip in the mornings to grab coffee or pick up small items before work. According to neighbors, she reacted strongly to small disputes, especially when she felt other people were ignoring basic rules. Several people who knew her later told investigators that she frequently confronted drivers about how they parked around her car. At about 8:10 a.m., Patrice pulled into a curbside parking space in front of a convenience store where she often stopped for coffee. The road carried steady morning traffic heading toward nearby office parks. She parked between two vehicles and remained inside her sedan with the engine running. A dark gray compact sedan soon pulled into the narrow space beside her. The 37-year-old driver parked within the painted lines and began stepping out of the vehicle. Patrice immediately leaned across her steering wheel and started shouting through her window that he had parked too close. Witnesses said the man initially tried to ignore the comments before briefly responding that he had parked within the lines. Patrice abruptly stepped out of her car. As the confrontation escalated, the driver returned to his seat and closed the door. Patrice walked to the front of the gray sedan and continued yelling while pointing toward the tight space between the vehicles. Several nearby drivers slowed down or turned their heads to watch the argument. She moved closer to the windshield. Witnesses later said she struck the glass with the flat of her hand and pounded on it several more times while the driver remained seated inside the vehicle. Patrice then turned back to her car, reached through the open door, and grabbed a disposable coffee cup from the center console. She stepped back toward the gray sedan and splashed the contents across the windshield and driver's side window, with some of the liquid entering through the partially open window. Witnesses described the driver wiping his face and the inside of the glass. Patrice shouted several more comments before turning away. She got back into her own sedan and slammed the door for several seconds. Both vehicles remained where they were. Then the gray sedan's engine started. According to witnesses, the driver appeared visibly angry. Instead of pulling away normally, the sedan accelerated suddenly from the curb space. The front bumper struck the rear corner of Patrice's parked car. The contact occurred at an angle. Rather than sliding the vehicle sideways, the impact caused Patrice's sedan to pivot outward from the curb. The rear of her car swung into the traffic lane, while the front remained near the parking space. The movement placed the driver's side of her car partially into the right travel lane. At that moment, a fully loaded 10-wheel delivery truck was approaching in that lane at about 35 miles per hour. The truck driver saw the sedan rotate into the roadway only seconds before the collision. Witnesses later reported hearing the horn and the sound of heavy braking, but the distance was too short to stop. The truck struck the driver's side of Patrice's sedan with significant force. The impact crushed the side of the vehicle and pushed it several feet down the roadway before both vehicles came to a stop. Bystanders ran toward the wreckage almost immediately. Patrice remained inside the vehicle, which had sustained severe intrusion into the driver's compartment. Emergency services were called immediately. Paramedics arrived quickly and began emergency treatment before transporting her to a nearby trauma hospital. Despite rapid medical care, she did not survive the injuries sustained in the crash. The medical examiner later determined the cause of death was catastrophic blunt force trauma resulting from the side impact collision with the truck. Police interviewed witnesses and reviewed nearby surveillance footage that captured portions of the confrontation. Investigators determined the incident began as a roadside dispute over parking that escalated into a road rage encounter. Prosecutors later filed charges against the driver of the gray sedan that included aggravated battery with a vehicle and reckless homicide, based on the finding that he intentionally accelerated into Patrice's parked car. It was March 9, 2015. The elevated commuter rail platform in Brockton, Massachusetts appeared routine, but a stalled train and packed passengers had narrowed the safe space to inches. Maintenance crews worked near the edge, while overhead announcements repeated instructions that many ignored. Amid the delay stood Denise Harper, 54. She had worked 26 years as a municipal payroll clerk for the city of Brockton, processing checks for public works crews, clerks, and school staff. Her job required accuracy and strict adherence to timelines. Co-workers described her as organized, but easily irritated by disruptions. She frequently reminded others that her taxes funded public services and believed that entitled her to priority treatment when systems slowed down. That evening, as the train sat stalled, she grew visibly agitated. She paced near the yellow strip, complaining loudly about wasted time and mismanaged service. She pointed at the maintenance worker near the platform edge and demanded that the train move immediately, insisting the delay was unacceptable. The older Brockton platform, Concrete surface, steel railings, and a narrow gap between train and edge became the focus of her frustration. Beneath removable steel plates were couplers and brake linkages that shifted slightly when trains restarted, tightening slack and moving cars forward by inches. The inbound train had paused for several minutes because of uneven brake pressure. A maintenance worker opened a small access panel near the platform edge to adjust a misaligned gap plate. Orange cones marked the inspection area, and repeated announcements instructed passengers to remain behind the yellow tactile strip until service resumed. Crowding intensified as another train waited behind. Denise moved closer to the platform edge, stating that the area was public space and that the worker should finish quickly. The technician directed her to step back while adjusting the plate. Instead, she stepped forward and placed one foot onto a temporary steel cover that had been laid over the open recess. Security review later confirmed the cover was not bolted down. It was intended to rest flat only while the train remained stationary. Denise shifted her weight onto it while angling her body toward the nearest door, positioning herself to board first once movement resumed. Air pressure returned to the brake system. When the engineer released the brakes, the cars rolled forward slightly to remove slack between couplers. That routine movement caused the gap plate assembly to shift. The loose cover beneath Denise's foot slid and tilted into the opening. Her right leg dropped suddenly into the narrow space between the platform and the train car. The train advanced only a short distance but carried significant mass. She lost balance and fell forward, her upper body striking the concrete platform edge as the steel side of the car pressed into her lower body. Nearby, passengers pulled back as the movement occurred. A transit employee activated the emergency brake immediately. The train stopped within seconds, but the clearance between the car and platform remained limited. Her pelvis and abdomen were compressed between the platform edge and the rigid steel underframe of the car. Emergency services were contacted immediately. Fire and EMS units arrived within minutes, but access required stabilizing the car and creating space with hydraulic lifting tools. When responders reached her, she had no detectable breathing or pulse. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was massive blunt and compressive trauma to the pelvis and abdomen. In plain terms, the crushing force ruptured major blood vessels and damaged internal organs, leading to rapid internal bleeding. The report stated death would have occurred within minutes due to blood loss and traumatic shock. Investigators found no mechanical defect. Data logs showed the slight forward movement was part of normal brake reset procedures. The unsecured temporary cover and her position at the platform edge led to the fall. The death was ruled accidental, and transit officials reinforced safety boundaries during maintenance before reopening the platform the next morning. It was March 9, 2017, at a commercial zipline facility along a narrow canyon outside Durango, Colorado. Guided groups crossed a series of lines between rim platforms, with the longest stretching about 200 feet above the canyon floor. Each participant wore a full-body harness system with hip and leg loops, supported by a secondary chest clip designed to keep the harness plates centered during the ride. Janelle Briscoe was 44 years old and ran a nail salon out of a strip mall in central Georgia. She traveled several times a year and preferred fast-paced, activity-driven stops that fit tightly into her schedule, often growing impatient with long briefings or procedures she felt were unnecessary. On previous trips, she had argued with staff over wait times and equipment requirements, presenting herself as experienced despite having limited training. She was not particularly athletic, but carried herself with confident authority and tended to dismiss instructions she believed slowed the group down. She booked the zipline tour the night before and arrived without reviewing the facility's preparation guidelines. She arrived with a group of 8 strangers, was visibly impatient during the ground briefing, and interrupted the staff member twice while the harness system was being explained. Before the harness fitting began, she spent several minutes at the staging area, making comments to the people standing near her about how simple the setup looked and how the briefing was probably longer than it needed to be. She picked up a spare carabiner from an equipment table without asking, turned it over in her hands, and set it back down when a staff member gave her a look. She had already decided she knew enough. When her harness was fitted, she complained immediately that the secondary chest clip was pressing uncomfortably against her sternum. The staff member told her it was mandatory and non-negotiable. Janelle waited until the staff member moved on to the next person, unclipped the secondary fastener herself, and tucked it flat against the harness strap. Before moving to the launch platform, she draped her jacket loosely over the front of the harness, which concealed the unclipped fastener from the staff member's final visual check at the platform edge. She was cleared to launch. The canyon was visible from the launch platform in both directions, a narrow cut in the rock roughly 200 feet below the cable. The line extended outward from the platform at a slight downward angle and disappeared toward the far rim. 2 participants from the group were already making their way across. The staging area behind her was quiet. Approximately 80 feet into the run, the primary harness plate began shifting laterally without the chest clip holding it in position. The shoulder loop on her left side loosened progressively as the plate rotated under the load and speed of the ride. Her left arm slipped through the widening gap, and the harness shifted out of position within seconds, allowing her torso to slip free from the system. She separated from the line cleanly, without contacting the cable or the trolley above her, and fell into the open canyon below. 2 participants who had already reached the landing platform on the far rim, and one still waiting at the launch platform, witnessed the fall. None were in a position to intervene. She fell approximately 200 feet and landed on the canyon floor. The tour was halted immediately, and the remaining participants were walked back to the staging area. Janelle was confirmed dead at the scene. A review of her harness confirmed the secondary chest clip had been manually unfastened prior to launch. Staff provided documentation of the pre-launch briefing and the mandatory chest clip policy. Witness accounts from 3 participants corroborated that the staff member had correctly fitted and explained the harness before Janelle tampered with it. The case was closed as an accidental death with no negligence found on the part of the facility. The jacket she used to conceal the unclipped fastener was recovered at the launch platform. It was November 8th, 2016, in Stamford, Connecticut. The morning air was cool and overcast, with temperatures hovering around 48 degrees Fahrenheit. Light foot traffic moved steadily through the commercial district as office workers arrived for the day. The building lobby featured polished tile flooring and a revolving door system at the main entrance. Fixed laminated safety glass panels flanked the doorway, secured within aluminum framing designed to hold the glass in place, even if fractured. Vanna Glint, 40, worked in property management coordination, overseeing tenant relations, inspections, and lease documentation across multiple buildings. She was scheduled to attend a morning walkthrough at 8:30 a.m. and had already expressed frustration about running behind after a delayed conference call. Colleagues described her as someone who prioritized efficiency and frequently complained about slow foot traffic interfering with her schedule. That morning, 2 individuals were already inside the revolving door compartment, rotating slowly as they maneuvered bags and briefcases through the exit. Vanna approached at a brisk pace. Without waiting for the compartment to clear, she placed both hands against the glass wing and pushed forward despite the occupied space. The internal braking system resisted the forced acceleration, limiting movement until the occupants cleared. She leaned her weight into the panel. The mechanism stalled under opposing force. Her right hand compressed briefly between the moving glass wing and the vertical frame. She jerked backward to free herself. The abrupt shift in momentum destabilized her footing on the polished tile. Her heel slid laterally, and her balance shifted sharply to the side. She fell toward the adjacent fixed sidelight panel. Her shoulder struck the laminated glass with substantial force. The panel fractured instantly, spiderweb cracks radiating from the impact point. The aluminum mullion flexed under the load. The lower anchor channel partially separated from its fasteners, allowing the fractured panel to bow inward beyond normal tolerance. The glass remained largely intact due to its interlayer, but the displacement exposed a rigid, jagged laminated edge where the panel had pulled free. As her upper body continued forward, her neck made direct contact with the exposed edge. The displaced laminated glass and deformed aluminum framing created a fixed cutting surface. The impact produced a deep lateral laceration along the left side of her neck. Witnesses described an immediate spray of blood against the tile and revolving door panel. She collapsed through the compromised opening, landing partially inside the lobby and partially within the vestibule threshold. Blood pooled rapidly beneath her head and shoulders, spreading across the tile. A nearby office worker pressed his jacket firmly against her neck in an attempt to stem the bleeding, while another bystander called emergency services. Vanna remained conscious for less than a minute. Her breathing became rapid and shallow. The bleeding was forceful and rhythmic, consistent with major vascular involvement. Her skin grew pale as blood volume dropped rapidly. Within moments, her movements weakened and she lost consciousness before paramedics arrived. Emergency responders reached the scene within 8 minutes. They applied pressure dressings, initiated advanced life support, and documented significant blood loss. She was transported to a hospital less than 2 miles away. Despite emergency surgical intervention, she was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The official cause of death was exsanguination due to a deep neck laceration involving major vascular structures, resulting in hypovolemic shock. Building management secured the entrance and cordoned off the area. Police documented the fractured panel and collected witness statements. Inspectors later confirmed that the laminated safety glass and framing system met applicable codes and had been properly installed. The structural failure occurred when forceful lateral impact displaced the lower anchor channel and deformed the mullion beyond design limits, not due to a pre-existing defect. No criminal charges were filed. The incident was ruled accidental. The damaged glazing system was replaced within 48 hours, and additional signage was installed reminding occupants to allow the revolving door compartment to clear before applying forward pressure. It was a weekday afternoon in the late summer of 2018 in a mid-sized suburban neighborhood in North Carolina. The area was a typical post-2000 residential development with single-family homes sitting on modest lots, shared driveways, and streets wide enough for 2 cars to pass without slowing. The houses on that block were owner-occupied for the most part, and most of the neighbors had lived there long enough to know each other by name, if not by much else. Paulette Hinshaw was 49 years old and worked part-time as a receptionist at a chiropractic office. She spent most of her evenings at home and handled most household maintenance decisions herself rather than deferring to outside help. She had hired and formally disputed payment with 3 separate contractors in the prior 2 years over work she deemed unsatisfactory after the fact. She was known in the neighborhood for leaving detailed negative reviews of local tradespeople online within days of hiring them, sometimes before the work was even fully complete. Among former co-workers, she had a reputation for consulting online tutorials as a substitute for professional advice and then attributing poor results to the tutorial rather than her own execution. A contractor had completed a partial kitchen renovation at Paulette's home several weeks prior. In the weeks following, she noticed the kitchen light fixture flickering intermittently. She contacted the contractor several times over a 2-week period and received no response after the 3rd attempt. Rather than hiring a new electrician, she looked up several online tutorials about replacing hardwired light fixtures. She had replaced a bathroom light fixture 2 years earlier without issue and proceeded on that basis. On the afternoon of the incident, she gathered the tools she needed and set up a step stool beneath the kitchen fixture. Before climbing up, she turned the wall switch off. She did not go to the breaker panel to cut power to the kitchen circuit. The kitchen floor had a linoleum surface that had been lightly damp from mopping earlier that afternoon. She was wearing socked feet. The kitchen fixture was a hardwired unit mounted to a ceiling junction box. Although the wall switch was off, investigators determined live voltage was still present inside the box. Cutting power at the breaker panel is the only reliable way to fully de-energize a circuit before handling exposed wiring. Paulette climbed the step stool and removed the fixture cover. She disconnected the old fixture from the wiring inside the junction box and began handling the exposed wire ends. While doing so, she made simultaneous contact with both the live and neutral wires with her bare right hand. She was standing on a damp linoleum floor in socked feet at the time of contact. The combination of simultaneous wire contact and the conductive path through her body to the damp floor was sufficient to cause cardiac arrest. She fell backward off the step stool onto the kitchen floor. The step stool landed on its side beside her. Her neighbor had arranged to come by that evening to retrieve a set of garden tools she had borrowed from Paulette 2 weeks earlier. She knocked several times and received no answer. She noticed the lights were on inside, and Paulette's car was in the driveway. The front door was unlocked. She entered and found Paulette on the kitchen floor. The fixture was partially disconnected and hanging from the junction box above. The wall switch was confirmed in the off position at the time of examination. The breaker for the kitchen circuit was confirmed still on. The damp condition of the floor surface was noted and consistent with Paulette having mopped earlier that afternoon. The neighbor's account of the prior arrangement to collect the garden tools and her discovery of Paulette was consistent with the physical evidence at the scene. The cause of death was confirmed as electrocution and ruled accidental. The contractor was interviewed and confirmed he had not been in contact with Paulette in the weeks prior to her death and had no involvement in the circumstances. No fault was assigned to any other party. The case was closed without further action against any individual. It was March 8, 2014, at a community farmers market in Tucson, Arizona. The morning was clear and cool, around 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Vendor stalls lined both sides of the main walkway, while customers moved steadily between tables selling produce, baked goods, and hot food. Near the center of the market, several food vendors prepared items on portable propane burners set on folding metal tables. Renee Cassell was 51 years old. She had left a county administrative job in 2012 after repeated disputes with coworkers. Since then, she had lived on a fixed income, while an alimony case moved slowly through family court. The weekend farmers market had become part of her routine. Vendors and regular visitors recognized her because she frequently confronted sellers about ingredients, food preparation, or what she described as the market's standards. Market staff later confirmed she had filed several written complaints about vendors during the previous year. One of the stalls operating that morning had been approved by the market committee 3 weeks earlier. It was a family-run stand selling pupusas, a thick corn tortilla filled with cheese and other ingredients, prepared on a flat griddle heated by propane burners. Beside the griddle sat a shallow steel pan of cooking oil used for frying certain fillings. Renee arrived at the market around 9:15 a.m., walking down the aisle while eating food she had purchased from another vendor earlier that morning. Witnesses said she moved directly toward the pupusa stall without stopping at other tables. She stepped past a small line of customers and immediately began speaking loudly about the stand, complaining that the vendor had not been properly reviewed and that the smell of frying food did not belong at the market. While the vendors continued working and their adult daughter tried to respond, Renee repeatedly talked over her. As the argument grew louder, several customers stepped aside. A tray of sample pieces sat at the front of the cooking table. Renee reached across the counter and grabbed one. The vendor's daughter tried to explain the ingredients, but Renee continued criticizing the stall and talking over her while pointing toward the cooking equipment. Witnesses said she leaned over the counter toward the griddle and oil pan as she argued about how the food was being prepared. Several nearby customers told her to step back from the cooking area. Instead, she leaned even farther across the table. As she shifted her weight forward, her forearm struck the edge of the cooking table and pushed aside a tray near the burner. The movement caused the portable burner holding the steel oil pan to shift and tip forward. Oil heated to more than 350 degrees Fahrenheit spilled over the front of the table, splashing directly onto Renee's upper chest, neck, and face. Witnesses described her screaming immediately. Hot oil transfers heat quickly and continues burning as it clings to skin and clothing. Several people nearby stepped back as Renee stumbled away from the table. Oil had soaked into the front of her shirt and continued transferring heat through the fabric. She collapsed to the ground within seconds. Bystanders rushed forward as someone called emergency services. Paramedics arrived within minutes and transported Renee to a regional burn center. Despite treatment, she died later that evening. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was complications from severe thermal burns, an airway injury caused by the hot cooking oil. Investigators concluded the spill occurred after the portable burner and oil pan were knocked off balance during the confrontation. No criminal charges were filed. After the incident, market organizers introduced new safety rules requiring food stalls to place barriers between cooking equipment and customer areas to reduce the risk of similar accidents. It was September 23, 2017, in Marietta, Georgia, where a 40-foot oak tree towered over a quiet suburban driveway. Several thick branches, some 8 to 10 inches wide, extended over a parked luxury sedan, casting heavy shadows across the concrete below. Tamara Skell, a 50-year-old corporate human resources director, decided to remove the overhanging branches herself after receiving a $1,200 quote. Outraged at what she called a scam price, she posted in a neighborhood social media group complaining that tree companies preyed on homeowners. She insisted anyone with common sense could handle the job. That morning, she bought a chainsaw and extension ladder, confident that internet research and her management background were enough preparation. The branches she planned to cut weighed several hundred pounds each, suspended 15 feet above the ground. Her neighbor, a retired construction worker in his late 60s, approached as Tamara set up her 16-foot aluminum ladder against the trunk. He warned her about cutting large branches without proper equipment, explaining how weight distribution could cause unpredictable falls. Tamara reacted with irritation, accusing him of trying to intimidate her and implying he relied on outdated methods. She told him she didn't need unsolicited advice and suggested he focus on his own property. When he noted the branch extended near the shared property line, she threatened to report him to the Homeowners Association for harassment. She phoned the HOA president to document that she was performing routine maintenance and claimed her neighbor was interfering out of jealousy over her vehicle. She seemed more intent on proving she was right than reconsidering the risk. She wore sandals, shorts, and a tank top with no safety equipment, dismissing store recommendations as upselling tactics. The ladder was positioned directly beneath the branch, placing her in the path of falling wood. Professional arborists would have cut the limb in sections using ropes, but Tamara planned a single cut through the entire branch. The chainsaw started easily as she balanced 12 feet up the ladder. She began cutting the 9-inch diameter branch without making a relief undercut, unaware the weight could cause it to split and tear free unpredictably. The limb extended over her vehicle, which she hoped to protect by removing the wood herself. After she cut about 60% through, loud popping sounds signaled the fibers were failing under the weight. As the wood sagged, the chainsaw blade began binding inside the cut, but she kept cutting as the heavy oak limb neared its breaking point. Witnesses later said the chainsaw's noise likely masked the sound of fibers splitting. The branch suddenly broke free with a sharp crack, pivoting downward toward her position as the remaining fibers gave way. She looked up just in time to see the wood descending, but had no chance to move. It struck her across the chest and head with significant force. The impact caused severe chest trauma and knocked her backward off the ladder. She fell 12 feet onto the concrete driveway, striking her head as the heavy branch landed on her body. The combined impacts caused multiple skull fractures and massive internal injuries. The neighbor who had warned her called emergency services and tried to move the branch, but couldn't shift it. She was unconscious with severe head trauma and multiple critical injuries as emergency services arrived. Her breathing was labored and irregular. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes and used hydraulic tools to lift the branch. Paramedics identified critical internal injuries and traumatic brain trauma during their assessment. Despite rapid intervention, her injuries were unsurvivable. She was transported to a regional trauma center but was pronounced dead at 1:17 p.m. from multiple blunt force trauma injuries. The attending physician explained the combination of the branch impact and the fall caused damage incompatible with life. The fire department's safety inspector later stated proper tree removal required cutting branches in sections and controlling their descent with ropes. Tamara's approach was extremely dangerous and inconsistent with professional safety practices. Her luxury vehicle was also destroyed, and insurance denied the claim after determining the damage resulted from unsafe tree removal practices. It was November 22, 2018. Late afternoon at a commercial gym in Tampa, Florida, the weight floor was packed for the holiday rush. Music played, plates clanged, and phones recorded short clips. Within minutes, a routine lift would end with paramedics working beside a bench and a crowd pressed silent against mirrored walls. Sheila Moreno, 45, had already posted twice to her fitness page that day. She worked part-time as a dental office receptionist, but spent most of her time building an online following around heavy lifting and strict discipline. She often described herself as self-taught and rejected what she called unnecessary interference. Trainers at the gym knew her as consistent but argumentative, especially when corrected. She had previously pushed back when staff suggested lowering weight, using a spotter, or adjusting equipment, insisting she knew her limits better than anyone else. That evening, she claimed the Smith machine during peak hours and began setting up for another filmed lift. The Smith machine guided a bar straight up and down on steel rails and included adjustable safety pegs designed to catch the bar if a repetition failed. Witnesses saw her load multiple 45-pound plates on each side for a heavy set meant for video content. When a floor trainer pointed to the safety pegs and advised raising them closer to shoulder height, she responded sharply and waved him off, making it clear she did not want instruction. She left the pegs near their lowest setting, wiped the bar quickly. Placed a flat bench underneath, and positioned herself for a behind-the-neck press without engaging the safeguards meant to prevent the bar from dropping onto her neck. The behind-the-neck press starts with the bar lowered behind the head, close to the upper spine, making it less stable than a standard overhead press and dependent on controlled grip and shoulder balance. Sheila had performed it before with lighter weight. This time, she added more plates than usual. She sat upright with her feet planted and her back against the bench, her phone mounted on a small tripod in front of her. The first repetition moved up steadily. On the second, the bar cleared the back of her head and reached near full extension. Sweat had built along her palms and across the knurled grip. As she lowered it for the third repetition, her right hand shifted slightly outward and the bar tilted. With the safety peg set too low to catch it at neck height, nothing interrupted its downward path. The bar struck the base of her neck and upper back with the full loaded weight. The impact forced her chin forward and drove her torso down against the bench. Witnesses nearby heard a sharp metallic crack followed by plates rattling against the rails. Her arms dropped immediately. The bar pressed her neck between steel and the bench edge, bending her forward at an unnatural angle. People nearby reacted within seconds, lifting the bar along the rails and moving the bench away. She remained motionless and not breathing. Emergency services were called immediately, and staff began CPR while an automated external defibrillator was applied. Paramedics arrived within minutes and continued advanced life support before transporting her to a nearby hospital. Hospital records in the autopsy determined that the bar fractured her cervical vertebrae in the upper spine. The break severely damaged the spinal cord. In simple terms, the injury interrupted the signals that control breathing and heartbeat. There were no signs of equipment failure. The cause of death was listed as cervical spine fracture with spinal cord injury due to accidental weightlifting trauma. The gym provided CCTV footage to investigators and reviewed its floor supervision policies. Management later required trainers to confirm safety stop placement before heavy lifts and posted clearer signage about assisted training and spotters. Her final recording remained on her phone. It was reviewed during the investigation and later incorporated into internal safety briefings as an example of how quickly a controlled lift can become fatal when safeguards are improperly set. It was July 14, 2016, in a desert nature park outside Tucson, Arizona. The preserved stretch of Sonoran Desert was lined with marked walking trails weaving between towering saguaro cacti, some rising over 40 feet tall. Warning signs posted along the paths instructed visitors not to touch, lean on, or disturb the plants due to their fragile internal structure. Laureen Brower was 52 years old and worked as a bank teller in suburban Ohio. She traveled alone once a year and treated each trip as a personal showcase, documenting her visits heavily online and comparing her photos to other tourist posts. During past vacations, she had developed a habit of pushing past minor restrictions at viewpoints and challenging access limits when they interfered with the image she wanted. She had little interest in the desert itself and chose the park mainly because she believed she could recreate and improve photos she had seen online, aiming to position herself closer to the towering saguaros than most visitors were allowed. She arrived mid-morning, already irritated by the heat and long walking distances. Instead of stopping at the ranger station, she moved straight toward the trailhead, glancing briefly at the posted guidelines before turning away and continuing with her camera ready. Within 10 minutes, she stepped off the marked trail toward a dense cluster of saguaros. A couple walking behind her pointed toward a warning sign as she crossed into the restricted area. Lorene turned back, gestured sharply toward the trail in her camera, and lingered in a tense exchange before waving them off and continuing deeper into the open desert. The ground grew uneven beneath her feet, scattered with loose gravel and shallow roots pushing through dry soil as the trail disappeared behind her. She stopped at one of the larger cacti and set her camera on a nearby rock for a timed shot. The saguaro's trunk measured roughly 2 feet across, with a mid-height arm extending outward several feet above her head. Its surface appeared firm and intact, giving no visible sign of the internal damage hidden beneath. Another visitor called out from the trail and motioned toward the posted barriers. Lorene glanced back, made a brief dismissive motion, and repositioned herself closer to the cactus to adjust her angle. Saguaro arms often begin forming along the trunk more than 10 feet above the ground and can weigh well over 100 pounds due to water-dense tissue stored inside. Over time, bacterial necrosis can hollow the interior, weakening the structure while leaving the outer skin mostly unchanged. As Lorene reached up and pulled on the arm for balance, shifting her weight into it, the compromised joint failed. The arm broke free without warning and dropped heavily onto her upper back and neck, driving her forward into the gravel. She did not move after the impact. The couple on the trail witnessed the arm detach from about 15 feet away and rushed toward the trail entrance to alert park staff, while another visitor approached cautiously. Rangers reached the area roughly 20 minutes later and approached carefully due to the dense spines covering the detached arm before confirming she had suffered fatal cervical spine injuries along with severe blunt force trauma. The detached arm was documented before removal, and investigators determined she had knowingly left the marked trail, ignored multiple warnings from other visitors, and physically handled the cactus despite posted restrictions. The death was ruled accidental, with no negligence attributed to park management. The surrounding section of trail was temporarily closed while staff inspected nearby saguaros for additional structural damage before reopening to the public. Lorene's camera was recovered at the scene, still containing photos she had taken earlier that morning. It was June 24, 2018 in Stockton, California. By 3 p.m., temperatures had climbed to 94 degrees and heat shimmered above the residential pavement. Traffic was light along the neighborhood street as an ice cream truck made its afternoon rounds. Zenda Quell, 44, worked at a regional insurance office and was known among colleagues for her insistence on specific procedures and her unwillingness to compromise on matters she deemed unfair. She had a reputation for lengthy complaints about parking violations, service wait times, and perceived slights in customer interactions. That Sunday, she was walking with 2 children, ages 6 and 8, along a residential block on the eastern side of the city. The children were visiting relatives, and Zenda had offered to take them out for the afternoon. The ice cream truck had stopped near the curb approximately 30 feet ahead. Parents and kids gathered around the service window, forming a loose line. Zenda approached the vendor and began pointing at the truck's position relative to the sidewalk. She insisted the vehicle was parked too close to a driveway entrance and demanded free ice cream cones as compensation for what she described as a safety hazard. The vendor, a man in his mid-30s who had been operating the route for 3 years, declined and explained that the truck was legally parked. Zenda raised her voice. Several parents turned to watch. After a brief exchange lasting roughly 2 minutes, the vendor closed the service window. The truck's engine started, and it began rolling forward at a slow pace down the street. Zenda stepped off the curb and into the roadway. She continued gesturing toward the departing truck, her attention fixed on its rear bumper as it moved away at roughly 8 to 10 miles per hour. She walked around the back of the vehicle and into the opposite lane without looking in either direction. A second ice cream truck was approaching from the other direction at approximately 20 to 25 miles per hour, consistent with residential traffic flow. Witnesses later reported that Zenda never turned her head toward the oncoming vehicle. She was still focused on the first truck when she stepped directly into the path of the second. The driver of the approaching truck saw her and immediately applied the brakes. The tires skidded briefly on the hot asphalt, leaving visible marks that investigators later documented and photographed for their report. The vehicle swerved slightly to the right, but there was insufficient stopping distance to avoid impact. The front bumper struck Zenda at hip level, The impact knocked her onto the hood before she fell back onto the pavement. The truck continued forward a short distance before coming to a complete stop. Bystanders shouted and rushed toward the scene. One person called 911 immediately. The two children stood on the sidewalk, motionless and silent. The driver of the second truck exited the vehicle and stood several feet away, visibly shaken and pale. Several witnesses gathered around but did not move Zenda. She remained on the pavement, unresponsive. Emergency responders arrived within minutes. Paramedics assessed Zenda at the scene and transported her to a nearby hospital. She was pronounced dead later that afternoon. The cause of death was listed as traumatic internal injuries, consistent with blunt force trauma sustained in the collision. Investigators reviewed witness statements and examined the roadway. The second driver submitted to testing and showed no signs of alcohol or drug use. No citations were issued. The official report cited pedestrian failure to yield and inattention as contributing factors. The first vendor provided a statement to police but was not implicated. The children were released to relatives later that evening, escorted away from the scene by family members. It was a weekday afternoon in the fall of 2018 in a mid-sized city in Ohio. The neighborhood was a typical urban residential area, made up of older 3- to 4-story apartment buildings with shared hallways and rows of mailboxes near the entrances. One standard brick building sat along the block with a small parking lot in the back and a row of buzzers at the front door. Tamsin Brule was 38 years old and worked as a freelance data entry contractor. She worked from home most days and rarely left the apartment before noon. Her income was modest and inconsistent, and she had been in the same unit for just over 2 years. She was known among former co-workers as someone who kept detailed personal logs of perceived slights and was quick to escalate minor disagreements into formal disputes. She had contacted a tenant advocacy line twice in the prior year over issues that were ultimately found to be within her landlord's rights. She had sent formal written complaints about neighbors on at least 3 separate occasions. She was not someone who let things go easily. Her relationship with her landlord had been strained for several months over a single maintenance request she felt had been deliberately ignored. The request involved a slow drain in the bathroom that she had reported in writing more than once. The landlord had acknowledged it but had not sent anyone to fix it. Tamsin had begun documenting every exchange in writing and had told a friend she intended to build a case against him. 3 weeks before her death, she had come across a warning in an online community forum about the dangers of mixing certain household cleaning products. She had commented under the post that the warning was overstated and that people were being dramatic about basic cleaning supplies. On the morning of the incident, her landlord sent a message notifying her of an unscheduled walkthrough scheduled for later that afternoon. Tamsin had told the same friend that if the landlord ever scheduled a walkthrough, she would take it as retaliation for her complaints. Her ex-husband was also coming by that same afternoon to collect a remaining box of his belongings. She had mentioned to a friend the previous week that she wanted the apartment to look a certain way before he arrived. She cleaned the main rooms first and moved to the bathroom last. The bathroom was a small enclosed space of roughly 35 square feet with a single window and an exhaust fan above the tub. Under the sink, she had several cleaning products, including a bleach-based spray and a separate ammonia-based floor cleaner. She applied both to the floor and tub surfaces within a short period and began scrubbing. The bathroom door was closed, the window was shut, the exhaust fan was not turned on. The combination of the 2 cleaners in the enclosed space began producing chloramine gas almost immediately. Chloramine is colorless and has a sharp chemical odor that can be mistaken for a strong cleaning smell. In a small enclosed bathroom with no ventilation, the concentration can rise quickly. Prolonged exposure in that environment can cause severe respiratory irritation, shortness of breath, and confusion. Based on the physical evidence and the confined layout of the room, investigators concluded she was exposed to the gas for a sustained period without ventilation. The bathroom door and window remained closed. Her ex-husband arrived that afternoon as planned. He knocked several times and received no answer. The front door was unlocked. He entered and noticed a strong chemical smell immediately upon stepping inside. The bathroom door was closed. He opened it and found her on the floor near the tub. Both cleaning product bottles were found open on the bathroom floor. The window was confirmed shut, and the exhaust fan was confirmed off at the time her ex-husband found her. The front door had been unlocked, consistent with his account of entering without a key. The landlord's walkthrough had not yet taken place. A determination was made that acute respiratory failure due to chemical inhalation was the cause of death. Investigators concluded that the chloramine gas produced by mixing the two cleaners in the unventilated space led to the fatal exposure. The manner was ruled accidental. The ex-husband cooperated fully and was eliminated as a person of interest the same day based on the physical evidence and corroborating accounts of his whereabouts earlier that afternoon. No fault was assigned to any other party. The case was closed. It was June 3, 2015, on a quiet residential cul-de-sac in a suburb north of Dallas, Texas. By 8 a.m., humidity hung in the warm air as temperatures climbed toward a forecast high of 94 degrees Fahrenheit. A landscaping truck and equipment trailer sat parked along the curb while a crew prepared tools outside the neighboring house. Wanda Kohler was 55 years old and had lived on the cul-de-sac since 2001. She worked part-time as an office administrator 3 days a week. Neighbors knew her for filing frequent complaints about property issues in the subdivision. Records later showed she had filed about 30 complaints over 14 years, 11 of them involving the same neighboring family. The Reyes family had lived next door for 9 years. Wanda had reported them over issues such as mailbox color, trash bin placement, a basketball hoop left overnight in the driveway, and landscaping she believed violated subdivision rules. City inspectors visited the property twice after her calls, but both inspections found no violations. On the morning of June 3rd, a landscaping company arrived to remove a dead oak tree and spread gravel along the side yard. The work had been approved through the Homeowners Association several weeks earlier. Neighbor notification was not required. The crew arrived around 8:20 a.m. with a pickup truck pulling an enclosed equipment trailer carrying a skid steer and tools. The supervisor, Thomas, positioned the truck to back the trailer into the Reyes driveway. Wanda came outside a few minutes later. She wore a bathrobe and held a coffee mug. She walked directly into the street and told Thomas the trailer could not park there. She said the area behind her property line was her easement. Thomas explained the work had association approval and held up the paperwork. Wanda called the Homeowners Association office from her phone. The office did not open until 9 a.m. She then called the city code enforcement line and left a message. She stayed in the street arguing while the truck idled. After about 20 minutes, Thomas told her he needed the space behind the trailer cleared so he could back into the driveway. 2 crew members standing near the trailer repeated the instruction. Wanda did not move. She remained standing in the roadway near the rear corner of the trailer. Thomas began reversing slowly. The truck moved at low speed, later estimated at under 3 miles per hour. One worker on the passenger side shouted for Wanda to step aside. Another worker on the driver's side waved his arms and shouted the same warning. A neighbor watching from across the cul-de-sac also called out. From the driver's seat, Thomas was using his side mirrors to line up the trailer with the driveway opening. The ground directly behind the trailer frame was not visible from that angle. The trailer's rear steel crossmember struck Wanda across the lower back and hip. The impact pushed her forward onto the pavement as the trailer rolled about 18 inches before the driver felt resistance and stopped. Wanda was found behind the rear axle, conscious but in severe pain, as workers pulled her clear and called emergency services at 8:53 a.m. Paramedics arrived about 8 minutes later and rushed her to a nearby trauma hospital, but she died during surgery. The autopsy found a fractured pelvic ring and torn pelvic vessels that caused massive internal bleeding. The official cause of death was hemorrhagic shock caused by pelvic fracture and vascular injury. Police interviewed the driver and crew. A neighbor's security camera showed Wanda standing behind the trailer while workers shouted for her to move. Investigators determined the driver could not see directly behind the trailer during the maneuver. No charges were filed, and the landscaping work resumed the following week.